So, Sean, for those people who own an electric scooter or an electric car, I suggest they look away because this could be very distressing. I give them 2 seconds. 1, 2. Now that fire, that smoke, then fire, would have lasted at least half an hour. Imagine you could concentrate that half an hour of pretty explosive force into a millisecond. That is an enormous bomb. Take out your house, take out a lot of things. Now, we don't know what happened to these pages of Hezbollah, but it was pretty ferocious, wasn't it? And we've probably never seen anything like it before, and maybe never again.
It is quite amazing, isn't it? As a military guy looking at what happened, what we know now is, I think, 11 people have died, and they've said thousands were injured. It appears that these pages exploded, for want of a better word, but all at the same time. And there's some amazing videos online of some of these things going off. And for something that's relatively small, it's packed a hell of a punch. And we can get into this, but the very fact that this looks very like a incredibly well-planned operation, and then the impact of it raises so many questions.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So before we get into it then, I'm going to make an assertion. There's only 2 things that could have actually blown up inside that pager. One is the battery, hence, the scooter film. The second is explosive that was actually added, either part of manufacturer or subsequent and so on. There were no other things that could have.
It's very hard to see any others. I've seen a few other theories floating around because I've done a few interviews on this, and but none of them are remotely plausible. The least plausible one is probably the battery exploding. And why it's least plausible is that we all run around with these things in our pockets most of the time. Most of the population of this country does. If they were likely to the batteries to explode, we wouldn't be carrying them around.
Well, yeah, but what we do know is the amount of energy in that battery is fearsome, as we've seen. What if somebody had discovered a way of releasing that energy with some sort of hack instantly?
Yeah,
I don't know. Is it beyond?
No, I mean, I think we've got to be. Again, none of us are nuclear physicists, but the film is about a battery that has a fair bit of current. It has a fair bit of energy stored in it. I don't know how much energy is stored in those.
It's a lithium battery, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's enough to move people around for a considerable period of time. So there's quite a lot of energy stored in that battery. When you're talking about a pager battery, often they are nothing more than, it's like in your watch, there's one of those little circular 10p piece batteries in there. I'm not underestimating that the same effect could happen, but it's very unlikely that the same amount of energy is stored in something the size of a pager, which will have a very, very small energy supply to it. And it's very difficult to see how that, I don't know the particular model of pager involved, but it's very likely to be a very small battery in there. And therefore, it's really unlikely to see that sort of energy release that we've seen on these video footages from that size of battery.
Yeah. Wouldn't need to be, the explosion wouldn't need to be that big, given, it's carried here. So it's very sort of localized, to get your kidneys or something. It just doesn't have to be that big.
Yeah, but if you look at the some of the online videos of this going off, it looked a little bit more than a little. It was pretty significant explosion.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of scaremongering sometimes around lithium batteries and the like, but the size of the battery involved, I don't think is remotely close to being, could generate the sort of impact that did, even with a software hack or whatever. Okay. You've got to have something that would initiate it. But
by the way, the very first thing that happened was there was a view that the battery was made. The pager was a Motorola pager. what I've seen today is people saying actually it was a small Hungarian firm. So that would lend some credence to this is some sort of supply chain.
Yeah, so given that it does appear to not have just been in one or two people's pages, it sounds like it was in at least 1,000, given the scale of the damage that's been caused. And we understand that Hezbollah recently took delivery of a new lot of pages. It's worth going back, actually. One of the reasons that Hezbollah has gone retrograde, I mean, when was the last time you had a pager?
Do you know what, Sean? I've never had a pager.
No,
I skipped that.
But none have I. But I'm trying to think back to the days when they were more commonplace, and I'd be surprised.
80s.
Yeah, it's decades ago. It's not years ago. Now I understand that because Israel has a technological advantage in around the Middle East, that therefore they will have the ability to track and listen in to mobile phone signals. So inevitably, even when I was in the military, we stop our soldiers going overseas with their mobile phones because they can be tracked, they can be intercepted. And Hezbollah would have been very nervous about that. And there's a lot of conversations around how do you work out where the Hezbollah leadership are at any one time, or the Hamas leadership, that you actually track mobile phone signals, listen in, and then you know where they're going to be at a certain time. So it sounds like Hezbollah have moved away from mobile phones because of this paranoia that they'll be listening in, and have gone massively retrograde to actually get a load of pages. So if you all did it together, I don't know, Motorola may well make these pages now, but you'd imagine that the supply chain for Motorola would be quite tight, wouldn't you?
You would really, yeah.
Whereas if you were commissioning a firm in a country that isn't known for making these things, Hezbollah might have believed, therefore, that they were avoiding getting something easily tracked. But it sounds like that this might have been something mossad, which is Israel's sort of external security organization. But my goodness, this would have taken a hell of a lot of planning.
Oh, that's awful, yeah. Incredible. So every hour, the numbers are going up. I think I just checked before we came on air, and they reckon over 4,000 people have been injured, serious to injury. A small proportion of those quite seriously, and about 10 dead so far. You can imagine that the number of dead will go up. So that's a lot of people. If these are all Hezbollah connected networking people, i.e. important people, then you were saying earlier, Sean, this is quite a clever ruse, isn't it?
Well, I think if you're in the intelligence community, one of the difficult things is knowing, you might know who the head of the bad guy, Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. But once you go down a bit in the organization, who are the people who help? Who are the people both nationally and internationally helping? So for Hezbollah, who in Iran is helping? Who in, the rest of Hezbollah? Is there anybody Hamas helping? Is there anybody? What you just don't know. But the beauty of this is that actually, if you've retrograded your comms to use pagers, you've got to give everybody in the organization a pager.
And it needs to be talking to each other from a
otherwise they can't talk to each other.
Operational point of view.
And there's no other reason for anybody else to have one of those pages.
So now they know, well, they might not actually know the individuals, but they know they've been, hurt.
Yeah, so imagine how effective that is, that you've actually managed to reach out into Iran, into lots of other countries and organizations to find out where this spider network of Hezbollah lies. Mm-hmm. And as you say, I didn't realize it was that many thousand, but my goodness, why would they have them? If, apparently there's a young girl who's tragically lost her life. We don't know the circumstances of that.
As part of this.
And again, we've always got to be careful about hearing one point of data about whether it's actually true or whether there's people prevailing. But my goodness, thousands of people They just imagine now Hezbollah. Anybody who's anything to do with Hezbollah will go, where next? Because I'd be thinking, first of all, what else has Israel done? This is
Or could do.
Yeah, but this has probably been, I don't know how long they've had them, but this has been so well planned. They've been used to having these around. Suddenly, you'd be losing your confidence about what else have they infiltrated.
Well, they're at the bottom of the sort of communication technology. There's actually, apart from pigeons or something, there's really nowhere to go. So the consequences of this in terms of taking away the ability for their enemy to synchronize, communicate with each other is pretty fierce.
Yeah, and I think that will cause Hezbollah to be on the back foot because they will have literally rocked their whole of command and control, both tactically but also strategically. And that's where it'd be fascinating when we get to know a little bit more if we do. But I don't know of an example where, if it's almost certainly Israel, but probably Mossad-led, that has managed to directly expose the full extent, or at least a much broader extent, of the Hezbollah network and damaged it, not so much physically, but certainly psychologically. I think the other question, though, that comes up is that if you're now the head of Hezbollah, what do you do next? And likewise, if you're Private Minister Netanyahu, this is a one-off, isn't it? Because you can't do this again.
No.
So you'll have been waiting for the ideal time to press the red button to set these things off.
Yeah. The thing is, you mentioned they'll be thinking about what else could they do. So you think about it. They check into a hotel with a digital clock. They get in their car. Now, okay, car bombs are very old-fashioned, but there's a lot of new technology in cars these days. There's numerous things in the lives of the people on both sides that they might be worried about. They'd be looking at their supply chains as well and being very nervous. How do you add the sort of checking that you need to do to make sure the stuff you're getting is actually okay?
The pages I remember were about the size of a matchbox, and they weren't that heavy. So they're not that big. I've seen reports that suggest that there's less than 10 grams of explosive is all that's required to do what they've done. So that's the weight of 10 drawing pins. So it's a pretty small volume, a pretty small weight of explosives. And you touch electronic devices or gadgets or whatever that are far bigger than that in your day-to-day life. And it almost feels like the stuff of sci-fi adventures, the shaped charges, and you're picking up a cup of tea, and is there something underneath the teacup, that's triggered, and it opens a whole new world out there, I think, and I do wonder. I think the Hezbollah will be wondering what else have they done, because Mossad would not have wanted to just have one game in play. They'll have had another. And we were chatting earlier. I think one of the things about the military, certainly in the wars, is you tended to deny one form of communication because it forced your enemy onto another one, and that other one was one in which you had better capabilities. So I have no way of knowing for this, but by taking them away from a legacy bit of kit, then pushing them potentially back onto mobile phones, that would be exactly the sort of strategy that the military would use and has used in the past.
Yes, there's that side. The other side is that, a big chunk, we don't know how big, of the command and control network in terms of people has been taken out. For some, for a short while, for many, completely. So that's going to have a massive effect as well.
It is. And that's why I say it will have thrown them on the back foot. And one of the enduring questions that comes out from me at this is, why now? What was the trigger, metaphorically and physically, that why now? Why was it important? Because of probably years worth of planning, months worth of execution to get an outrageous, audacious plan like this in place. given it's a one-off, why was it now?
Yeah.
And we can get into that as to where I think the why now, but I think it's fascinating. It's just an amazing act which will get everybody, not only Hezbollah, but everybody just looking at everything they do and going, how vulnerable are we? I mean, as we said, you and I, most people watching this will have a mobile phone. This is considerably heavier and bigger than the pagers. A lot more capacity to hide explosives. So we spend a lot of it with it here.
Yeah.
A lot of it with it here.
Do you know, only if you're a little bit older with grey hair do you do that and that. Most young people actually use the speaker and walk around like that or like that.
Maybe they're healthier.
Could be. Are you showing signs at all?
Lots of them.
And final one from me, because I think time is the thing we should come back to, but the final one from me was that Hezbollah have got this sort of righteous indignation now, how dare they? And it made me just tot up how many missiles they've thrown at Israel, justifying or criticizing just as a plain fact. And it's tens of thousands, if you include drones. And I can't remember exactly when the mid-2000 war was, but like 2004, 2005, 2006 something, there was 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 missiles thrown at Israel during that time. And they got this massive stockpile of maybe up to 150,000. So I'm not sure they can claim any righteous indignation from this, do you think?
It's all about Wasta. It's all about influence. It's all about face saving. And that's what the Middle East, that's why when somebody gets killed, the tit for tat, and everybody sort of knows that has to happen. I suspect this is not something that we've ever seen before. I don't know, assassinate one person, assassinate another, rockets get fired, another rockets get fired. This is something a much more sinister, much more professional. And I genuinely think that Hamas and Hezbollah will be worrying now about their own security, about they'll have to have a complete reset on the way that they consider security, whether it's communications, whether it's locations, because they've been compromised, and they've been compromised at the very heart of their organization. That is something that you don't know where to turn. Where is the mole? Where is the hole? Where is the gap? That takes time to resolve, and I think that will be very unsettling for Hezbollah. So yes, away from the rhetoric of we're embarrassed, how could they do that? Will vow revenge and look strong? I think there's some pretty significant questions out there.
And communicating to get together might be difficult right now.
Yeah, what did you say? Carrier pigeons. I mean, the burner phones and the like. There are ways of doing that. But of course, burner phones are all very well. But if you have a different number every time, how does anybody know how to contact you? There's not easy ways of comms. There are other ways of communicating. You go all the way back to radios and stuff like this, and there's frequency agile radios, but all of those cost a lot of money and they are a limited supply. So, it's just, it's going to be a reset.
Okay, yeah, that's the word.
But I think they're going back to the question of timing, that's, and it is conjecture, but given this was so much planning, there must have been a reason why now. And to explore that, I think you have to look at where is Israel at the moment in the war. They've effectively said that the fight against Hamas is all but over. In other words, they virtually destroyed Hamas. They haven't found Yahya Sinwar yet. They haven't, there's no doubt Hamas will still, like whack-a-mole, will still be popping up here, there, and everywhere. But they pretty much said that the military campaign is all but over. Now they're worried about how Iran will react, because it still hasn't reacted for that assassination on their soil at the end of July. And of course, they know that Hezbollah are the way that Iran uses Hezbollah to exert influence. And therefore, it feels like there's a bit of a reset by Israel from Gaza to now position itself at the northern border. And I think they've recently said in the last couple of days they're trying to get people to move back into the area again. And I think that's because if they move back into the area and Hezbollah attacks, then Israel will be ready, armed and dangerous, ready to react to that and deal with the Hezbollah challenge. But it feels like they might be just trying to get towards a bit of an end game by, right, if you want to have a go, Hezbollah, we're going to be at your doorstep. And by the way, we've just destroyed your communication system, and you're going to spend quite a while trying to get your command and control back together again.
Yeah. Zelensky's been on at the West for a long time to be allowed to use some of the weapons, missiles and so on, actually directly into Russian territory. In fact, the West has been on to Zelensky as well. And there's a sort of fragmented response in the West. And in the middle of it all, Putin is threatening everybody collectively and individually. Where are we at the moment?
Well, when we recorded last week's, we were waiting for President Biden to meet our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and we were expecting that the Brits were going to influence the Americans to let Zelensky use the long-range weapons against targets within Russia. But as we sit here today, a week later, no sign of any progress. It's been really interesting, the body language around this, because President Zelensky, his forces are on the back foot at the moment. They are being pushed back in the Donbass, suffering a lot of casualties. They need to change the game. They clearly want the weapons. Let us use the weapons as they were designed to be used and take the restrictions off us. And a lot of the West community do seem to be happy with that. But Putin's just escalated the rhetoric. And what it's just exposed is that Russia only has one person to make the decisions. So Putin can threaten, do this, don't do it. NATO, 32 countries. And you can only therefore move at the speed of the slowest. And therefore...
Or weakest.
Yeah. And whether that's the weakest, not necessarily militarily, but maybe in terms of robustness.
Yeah.
And therefore, you can see instantly that Russia will always have an advantage over, because it's an autocracy rather than a decision by committee.
So within an hour, he can be on television threatening people.
And the West can't do that. I think what's also interesting, though, which just to counter it slightly, is that the West has started to use language like no one Western weapon is going to be decisive. And actually, Zelensky, you already have weapons that are capable of striking deep within Russia. Use your own weapons. And literally overnight last night, I noticed that was Toropets. There was a huge barrage of drones that attacked apparently a warehouse that was storing weapons there, Russian weapons, including some North Korean weapons, apparently.
On Russian soil.
500 kilometers, best part of, away from the Ukraine border. So far in excess of the range of any of the weapons that the West would be able to provide.
And would these be suicide drones?
Almost certainly. Yeah, almost certainly.
Not coming back.
But I think that the key here is that when we develop drones that are long range, they cost a fortune. They are literally $1 million or $2 million per time. Therefore, quantity is really difficult to provide. What Zelensky's doing is he's taking technology from the West, components, literally, it appears, bolting them together at night, sending them off next morning. So he doesn't have to do any of the flight testing or the safety case stuff, which we've talked about before.
Yeah.
But what he is doing is creating volume. And whilst it appears the Russians are claiming that they're shooting down a lot of these drones.
Yeah, need it for you to get through.
And that seems to be what's happening.
Yeah, so if you get 20 drones at $50,000 a pop versus one missile, it's, comparative strength.
Yeah, it's back to that banter we've always said about the quantity has a quality all of its own sometimes. But I think what's interesting is that it's not just about what Zelensky's doing, it's also the Russians have ways of countering drones. So, for example, GPS jamming is a really good way of jamming drones because you jam the signal, how do they know where they're going? They crash. But there's some really interesting technology around which strays into more sensitive areas, but terrain mapping, so you literally can fly on GPS up to a certain point in the route and then you terrain map from there. In other words, you know the contours of the terrain as you approach the target. So all you're doing is making sure that terrain matches the picture that you have. That doesn't need any GPS at all. That's simply, or you can do image matching. So you literally have pictures, and the thing constantly goes from picture to picture to picture to home in on its target. That's passive and therefore incredibly difficult to jam. And I suspect what's happening here is that Russia's just putting up its GPS jammers. Ukraine's going, didn't hit too many last night. Let's try a different form of tracking. And so you're still going to shoot some of them down, but the jamming part that stops them get to their target, I suspect Ukraine is able to adapt its aiming capability so much quicker, and that seems to be delivering results. And I think that'll be something that will... Just imagine you were President Biden. Do I want to give you permission to use very expensive long-range missiles into Russia, or am I happy to provide all of the subcomponents to you and a jigsaw that says join A to B to C to D, press button E, off it goes? Almost certainly that would be politically much more attractive.
And very much harder to spot as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's this game of brinkmanship on the part of Putin. First one to blink, or maybe you could call it blinkmanship.
Did you used to be a comedian? No.
Sean, Russia is casting its line out anywhere to get parts, weapons, the whole thing. Everybody's, running short. It's got to find new friends. And I gather that Russia has a new long-range drone. It's rather similar to the Shahed drone from Iran. But perhaps this one didn't come from Iran. So what are we learning?
Yeah, I mean, in the same way we were talking earlier about the West providing components so that Ukraine can build their own weapons, politically it's a lot more flexible and also allows Zelensky to prepare weapons a lot quicker. They're not the only ones doing that. So Russia was importing these, they're like, we'll have a picture of one, but basically triangular shaped drones, Shahed 136. They're not very fast, about 140 miles an hour. They're not that difficult to shoot down, but they're not that expensive, and they go a long way. And Russia imported loads of these from Iran, and there was a lot of talk that Russia wants to build them themselves, potentially under license in Russia. Well, we now understand that the Garpia drone, catchy name for a drone, Russia's been producing these last year. It produced 2,500 from July to the following July. And they look very similar to the Shahed 136. The one difference, though, it's got a different engine in it. And Western sources suggest that actually that engine has come from China. Now, if it's true, that has significant implications, because up till now, China's always said, we're not supporting Russia, we're not supporting Ukraine, we are trying to stay on the fence. But there's long been a suspicion that they're helping Russia with some technology.
Okay.
If they're now providing a key component for a long-range drone that will be used effectively to target across the whole of Ukraine, for me, that starts to put Chinese fingers in the mangle.
Is it possible that, because these engines could be engines for a lot of different things, not necessarily just drones. So, and I use the word innocently with inverted commas, but they could have come from anywhere in China. I mean, they could have come from a little manufacturer that sells engines. I mean, it's unlikely, but it's possible.
No, and all of these things are possible. I think if you were serious, as China purports to be, about not getting involved directly in supporting Russia, then you'd be very careful about providing dual-use technology, stuff that can be used. And this is a production facility. This isn't one-off. We're talking about 2,500 of these were built last year. You can bet your bottom dollar that there'll be at least 5 or 6 times as many built in the next year. So there's a constant supply of these engines going across. What were they used in before? Why? What was the justification? China would have known full well where these engines are going, how they're being used.
I mean, so far China's been very careful. I don't think they really want to get involved in a war. The economic geographic dominance, which they appear to be seeking, the long-range plan they've been on, this appears to be China's main game. Would they endanger some of that by supplying a few little engines? I mean, you say 2,500 is a lot. It is a lot. Given that Zelensky is trying to build 1 million drones, I mean, 2,500 not a huge number.
No, it's not. And you could take this either way. I think part of why I think it's important is that these drones, whether they are deliberately targeting civilian targets or not, as a military guy, I struggle to understand why you target civilians, because you haven't got that many rockets or drones. So why would you waste them on non-military targets? But the very fact remains is most of them get shot down, and therefore when they get shot down, they're going to end up hitting things on the ground. And if you are directly providing a vital part of a military capability that is predominantly used to kill civilians, that has pretty profound implications for your role. You can't sleepwalk into that sort of commitment. Let's face it, the West is worried about providing long-range weapons to Ukraine, even though evidently Russia has invaded. You're on the right side of this. China, as you say, has a vested interest in not getting directly involved, or at least not seen to be directly involved.
But if we know it, then it's known.
Yes.
So I'd be interested to see what the diplomacy is that's happening at the moment. There will be people talking, won't there? Actually, nobody would want this to be an escalation with China.
No, and I'm not sure the risk is escalation with China. I think it's difficult to see China throwing its weight behind Russia. It's got more to lose than Russia. Russia has got massive oil reserves, and therefore it's commercial. It can generate enough money just by exporting oil. And we've talked about before, there's always a demand for it. China, whether it's rubber ducks, as we've talked about before, has a huge export in all sorts of other goods, and the balance of trade with the rest of the world is significantly greater in favor of Chinese exports than it is the West's exports to China. That's where it would hurt China. If the West smelt a rat that China was starting to get involved, they would turn off the tap in terms of buying Chinese goods. That would hurt the West, but it would have a huge penalty for China in a way that we can't do with Russia. We talk about Russia, well, we stop buying their oil. Yeah, but India buys their oil. It still comes back to us because there's a set amount of oil delivered each year, and it might come from different places. That's not true with the commercial enterprises of China. They would stand to lose a lot more. And if they're going to do that, I think they want to do it by seizing someone like Taiwan. They wouldn't want to do it by backing Russia. I just can't see why they would do that at the moment.
Question that's on everybody's lips. When is the war between Russia and Ukraine going to finish?
Yeah, if we knew that one, we'd be very wise men, and I don't think we are. I think it's incredibly sensitive. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about it today was that however uncomfortable it is, the war will end at some stage. Will it end with one side winning? Difficult to see that. If Putin wants the whole of Ukraine, almost certainly that's not going to happen. If he gets the whole of the Donbass, he might declare victory for his special military operation, and that would stick in the throat of the West.
And that's the land corridor.
That's the Donbass, the land corridor, and Crimea.
Yeah, so that's strategically, that's very important.
Very important. So if a deal was done around that, that would effectively reward Putin for his illegal invasion and aggression, which had all sorts of implications for global security. It looks like both sides. So Russia is taking huge casualties at the moment. It's got fewer people joining than they're losing. So it's not a sustainable pace, but it looks like they're pushing really hard to try and get the last bit of the Donbass they don't have, get it this year, and then pause. But it doesn't seem they've got enough to do a strategic breakthrough, and it doesn't look like the Ukraine has for a strategic breakthrough either. So we're heading for a period of potentially stalemate for the winter. I'm not suggesting there won't be fighting go on, but now President Zelensky is busy touting the fact that he's got his victory plan. I don't know if you've read about that apparently it's 90% complete now, and he's putting the finishing touches, and he's going to be presenting it to the West next year. As a military guy, it's difficult to see what a victory plan might comprise, but he's the expert.
Whatever victory is.
Yeah, he's clearly got a plan, and that's great. Will the West's appetite for continuing to fund the war continue? We've got our own domestic priorities in this country. How long are we going to be prepared to keep funding? We want to build new hospitals, or do we continue to support the war in Ukraine?
Or pay the winter fuel allowance.
And if there's no prospect of either side significantly changing the line on the map, what's the right answer?
Well, the other thing is the politics of it. If Trump gets in November, obviously it'd be January before he actually takes over in the White House, things might change very quickly. If Kamala Harris gets in, then, it might be less decisive. I'm not saying that's for good or bad, but and some of the administration will change if Trump gets in as well. So there'd be discontinuity.
Yeah, and I think the uncomfortable bit I have about this conversation is, a week today I head off to Ukraine, and every Ukrainian you speak to says, that's up to us to decide. It's not up to you to decide. And I go, no, you're absolutely right. It's not. But in that binary world, actually, the West has a dog in the fight, because without the West's support, it would be incredibly difficult for Ukraine to prevail. And that's not a threat. It's just a harsh reality of life. And if a change of administration in the US, it could be that the tap gets turned off. If the tap was turned off, it's very difficult for the West to provide the same level of support that that when we've got the US providing support as well, Europe would struggle to make up that difference. And even with all of that, Russia is still on the front foot.
Yeah. And we know that Germany is already, all but the tap's going to be turned off as well. Still the biggest economy in the EU.
I know it's a difficult one because it will inflame some of our viewers, because I believe wholeheartedly it's up to President Zelensky to decide what he wants to do. I also believe that he's not the only stakeholder, though, because he relies on the support of the West. We saw it over Christmas, New Year, that America was wobbling slightly. That $60 billion of aid that was delayed put Russia on the front foot. The politicians are still wholeheartedly behind President Zelensky, and I absolutely support that. But even with all that support, Zelensky is ceding ground at the moment on the crucial area of the Donbass. And, at some stage, the war's got to end and allow Ukraine to transition into a land where you start to rebuild again, worry about what's its long-term security going to look like. Whether that's in NATO or whatever. But all those conversations can't happen until the war is brought to an end. And we're racing towards the 3-year anniversary, to over 2.5 years now. How much longer is it going to go on with this horrible loss of life? And, I'm off to visit superhumans, aren't I, in Lviv. So just over a week's time, I'll be visiting. And I know it'll be emotional, because I know when I saw the impacts of our young men, predominantly our soldiers in Afghanistan who'd lost an arm, a leg or more, that the profound implications for the rest of their life, the support they needed, both physical and mental. And, Lviv's they've got 100 times more casualties. That's the long-term impacts of this war. It isn't just, the war's over, let's go back to our day-to-day lives. There's a massive rebuilding, there's a massive psychological impact, massive physical impact. And then there's all these people who have left Ukraine. There's all of the people who would now have to come back. Are their homes still there? How do you rebuild your lives? So really difficult, very difficult.
And if Trump wins, just to take a slightly different tack, if Trump wins, then there'll be a certain Robert Kennedy Jr. in the government. He has big things to say about the war and its ending. He also has big things to say about the reconstruction of Ukraine. Wouldn't surprise me if Trump wins, if Kennedy is right in the middle of all of that. Very, very outspoken. He got some very, very strong opinions. Not all of them attractive to other parts of the United States.
I know you've been a bit of a follower of him, haven't you? Not necessarily a supporter, but a follower of him. What's he positioning himself to do in the Trump administration?
Well, that's not clear, but he's well and truly put his force. He's He's discontinued his role in the swing states so as not to cause confusion. He's still running in the other states, which means he'll take more Democrat votes than Trump. He's got an agreement with Trump. They don't agree on everything, but they do agree on 70% of the things. And he says Trump agrees with him on all the major things, which is corruption in the nutrition industry, in the pharmaceutical industry. He wants to get America healthy again, which he says they're not at the moment. It's a very unhealthy country. But he's also got very strong opinions about the wars, plural, and the reconstruction effort and who the winners are. And I might imagine if they win, he'll somehow be in the middle of it all.
Yeah, as you say, there's a huge amount of politics that will play. And frankly, a horrible thing to admit, but it's about $1 trillion worth of...
horrendous.
And whenever that sort of money is flowing about, business will be, lapping it up. And that will have a huge amount of political implications as well.
Yeah, too.